Okay, welcome everyone. I'm Francis Seeley from Enfield Climate Action Forum, and this is one of our usual webinars that we do every month, and today we're doing it on biodiversity. And in the next four forums we're having, we're going to deal with that. This one on biodiversity, and then the next one in July will be on heat excess itself, and we'll be looking at, the problem, how worse it will get, who is going to be affected, and what can we do about it. Then in August, we're going to deal with air pollution. And air pollution, we know, is exacerbated by climate change. And we'll have someone, I hope, talking about that. And then some of the projects we're doing around that. For example, we're working with schools and we give them some of the schools' air pollution monitors. We're working with a community group in Upper Edmonton, which is a deprived area of our borough. And, that we hope that we can look at the results of that monitoring and see what action we can take. And we're also looking at what action we can take. And then in September, which as far as we've gotten organising at the moment, we're going to look at wildfires and grass fires. One of our members has a really good contact in the Australian Fire Service, and he's agreed to come on. He talks to people across Europe, and he's going to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, his time, to talk to us at 7 o'clock about wildfires. And today I was in touch with the commander of the Enfield Fire Brigade, and he is very keen on what we're doing, and he's going to join us with one of his colleagues as well. So it looks as if we've got quite a good series of forums, and they're all about developing, I hope, capacity building and community resilience. We want to see what we can do in our community to build up the resilience of people in the community and what projects we can develop. We're working with the London Resilience Project. We've had some wild weather cafes in two parts of the borough, working with the University of Birmingham. And when they've done their report, that will look at community resilience as well. So all of these activities around to see what we can do locally to build up community resilience. Anyhow, let's start with this webinar now, this forum now. And we're going to deal with biodiversity, because biodiversity is a huge problem. If, biodiversity is affected, it can affect life on this planet. And we've got two speakers here today. And the first one is Kezia, and Kezia is from the Grantham Institute and the London School of Economics. And I know that she'll tell us a bit more about herself in this session. So Kezia, are you here with us?
Yes, I am. I actually go by Kaya these days, but yeah.
You go by Kaya.
Yeah.
Okay. I know you use both names. I picked Kezia because I rather like Kezia. But okay, Kaya. Yeah. So let's start with you, and thank you for coming on. I mean, it's really great that you're here with us. So could you start by telling us a bit about yourself and your background?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thanks for having me. I am a social environmental scientist, meaning I've got background both in ecology and social sciences, and my research is primarily around nature conservation in various tropical countries and in the UK, and more recently around climate adaptation as well. And these days, actually more on the social side, so sort of psychology, human behavior around conservation and sustainability issues. I can hear an echo from someone's.
Yeah, I just muted that person,
Oh, yeah,
so I think it should be okay.
So yeah, that's mostly what I do.
Okay, well, that sounds really interesting and important. Well, this is about biodiversity, and it's about the biodiversity crisis, not just about biodiversity. Now, in your opinion, how serious do you think that crisis is, the one that we're facing?
Well, there isn't 100% agreement, but really high agreement, pointing to the fact that we are most likely entering a new mass extinction event, meaning that species are going out faster than the new ones are created. Definitely losing species at a much higher rate than ever experienced in human history. And yeah, we are yet to see the height of it, but it's very much accelerating. So it is very concerning for anyone working in the area of nature conservation.
When you say it's serious, I mean, we think of biodiversity as affecting plants and animals, and sometimes people don't think of it affecting us as human beings. But that's not the case, is it? When you have a biodiversity crisis, it doesn't just affect plants, it doesn't just affect animals, it affects us, it affects human beings in terms of our existence on this planet.
Well, very much so, because of the way that we are interconnected, both with different species and in with different places around the globe, right? So these days, with the globalized trade networks in particular, and the fact that high percentage of the food in UK or in Europe it does not come from here, it comes from all over the place. And oftentimes, like let's say take coffee, for instance, or cacao, to produce these kind of products, oftentimes you get massive plantations of this one type of a particular plant, of a particular genotype. You get one type of pest that didn't happen to be protected against by the particular herbicide that this was that was produced to protect these plants against, and you get, like, I think 2 years ago there was 60% cacao losses in South America. Like, and this is just the beginning, right? Like, the more we simplify the ecosystems, the more they become fragile to, and ecosystems that, they're natural, but also the ones that we are managing, like farmed ecosystems, the more they become vulnerable to these little shocks, and we are putting them in under a perfect storm of pressures from our activities, from encroaching on habitats and dosing them with fertilizer, well, actually over fertilizing, but yeah, herbicides, pesticides, and then on top of it, climate change that just makes the temperatures unlivable. And uh, yeah, yeah, maybe I'll just stop here.
I mean, you say it's serious in that sense, but the government's intelligence chiefs have actually produced a report to say how serious it is. Now, I know this isn't your speciality, so I won't embarrass you by asking you the details, but they said the crisis is so bad that it could result in a crisis in mass migrations, food shortages, which you mentioned, higher food prices, and global and domestic disorder. Now, is that something that you think is rather panicky, or do you think that that is something that we should realize that if we don't do something about it, we are going to face crises of this kind?
I mean, yes, so I'm not actually an expert on security, so this is not an authoritative answer, but um, I do work a lot uh, in Africa and South America, um, and so climate and biodiversity crises are linked. They're not independent one of another, right? And when we have, for instance, when we have heat shocks, we get algal blooms that make fishing impossible, right? Or we get some kind of disruption in actually fishing quite often happens these days. Whether the shock comes from initially from, for instance, extreme climate or a zoonotic disease, or when we're talking about a lot of tropical areas around the globe, they're populated by people who are just literally eking out their existence, and they are selling to global markets, but it is really easy to disrupt these livelihoods, right? Whether through climate or Or for instance, yeah, there's a global shock in cacao health or in some other crop health. Um, and all of a sudden they lose their livelihoods and they really just about hanging, making things work. And when that happens, communities are disrupted really quickly. And the more it happens on scale, the more likely it is that we will see mass migration. So I don't think that, mass migration will originate on its own from biodiversity collapse, but from the biodiversity collapse connected to heat, because those will go hand. Essentially, this is what will happen. Heat will disrupt ecosystems, making livelihoods impossible. And then you've got mass migration. And you can already see, I mean, I've got only anecdotal evidence of that, but yeah, in places in Africa where, for instance, rivers would run dry and men stop being able to fish, that has got rampant consequences for local communities, because then, they cannot feed their families. They have to leave for longer. It's connected to like shame. Women leave them, start marrying off their daughters. Before they reach mature age. Like there's so many social consequences that stem from the fact that they just cannot sustain themselves because the ecosystem is collapsing.
But,
So it's kind of, that's where I see the
yeah.
connection.
But,
Sorry,
but it
I'll stop
also
now.
will affect us here in the UK, won't it, in terms of rising prices? You talked about food shortages, and the Climate Change Committee has said, I think, 2 or 3 years in a row, that we're very ill prepared for tackling this crisis, both the climate change crisis and the biodiversity crisis, and we're way behind many other countries. How prepared, in your opinion, do you think we are?
That's not actually, unfortunately, a question I am very well suited to answer. Because my expertise lies a lot more on the sort of biodiversity conservation side than the security and preparedness of the government side. So I'd rather not answer this, but go on, because I'm not confident in what I'm going to say.
Okay, I mean, that's not fair of me to ask you that really, but I mean, I do know that the Climate Change Committee has said again and again that in this country, we're way behind on climate change adaptation, and that's something we should really look at, and it's been said again and again. So that's something we could deal with in another webinar, I hope. But one thing you are, I think, your expertise on and your interest on is how we build national resilience and preparedness by focusing on particular issues. And I think you do a lot of work, don't you, on soil restoration and wetland restoration. Would you like to tell us about that and how that can improve and enhance biodiversity?
So I'll give you again, actually, my own perspective. I don't personally do wetland restoration. What I do is work with farmers to understand their attitudes towards different conservation measures. So I'm not sure if you're aware, but UK is actually one of the most biodiversity depleted countries in the world. It actually has lost most of its biodiversity already. Not recently, actually, but in previous centuries, and in particular, large megafauna. So for the UK, the main objective then would be to actually restore nature, because so much of it has been already lost in terms of diversity, in terms of abundance, and UK is continuing to lose nature, to lose, for instance, a lot of birds, due to continued simplification of habitats, in particular around farming. So increasing and yeah, just farming in the kind of modern mechanized. Well, actually, it's not the mechanization is the problem, but a sort of conventional agriculture that relies on large amounts of external chemical inputs has a tendency to simplify soils and soil life. And long term actually reduce their fertility. And also, in the same way as simplifying any other system, make it more vulnerable to shocks. So, from my perspective, anything that works towards restoring ecological processes, so diversity, allowing species to move between areas, so connecting habitats, creating mosaics of connected habitats, that's uber important. So not just, isolated restoration areas, but to the extent possible, connecting with other initiatives in other areas to have this connectivity of habitats. That's super important. And also allowing space for disturbance, right? So for fires, for waters to actually come out a little bit of the bank. That's something that as humans we've been trying to fight against for so long, to just sort of dominate rivers, dominate fires. And now we're finding that actually a certain amount of it is sort of necessary to keep biodiversity alive, because different kinds of species thrive in different habitats that are created through these disturbances. And we as humans are not very good at recreating these kind of mosaics ourselves.
So would something like regenerative agriculture be
Regenerative agriculture, various forms of what people call rewilding, but it doesn't have to be, full on just leave a field to itself. It can take various forms of just, the more various functions it's allowed to do, right? So if it's missing large herbivores, let's allow some large herbivores in if we can. If we can't have large predators in there, then we're going to have to think about, managing the populations of those large herbivores. But if you can introduce the large predators, then even better. Restoring sections of rivers to allow them a wilder course. This kind of stuff that's immensely important.
I mean, obviously, in a forum like our own in Enfield, and we've got other people from other local areas as well, they'd be keen to know what they can do locally, both within their communities and as individuals. Do you have any message you could give to them? What could they do to make a difference?
Well, so biodiversity works on nature, right? In a nested way, right? So we can create microhabitats and larger habitats. So another threat to biodiversity comes from invasive species as well. So actually planting even small spots, but with wild and native flowers, with native shrubs. Actually, shrubs are great for like sustaining bird life and insect life. Yeah, like going to native species and creating spots of habitats. Actually, and cities actually, in fact, can be sometimes more biodiverse than surrounding countryside, partly because of how countryside is being managed these days. But actually, do not underestimate what you can create in cities by creating these micro spots of habitats, because species do move between them. So that is actually important. So in that way, that can be sustained. But I think the other thing is actually getting behind some kind of larger scale actions where people do come. I mean, London is a large area in the end, right? And when people connect on a scale, I think, yeah, the interconnection of different small, for instance, restoration efforts is one of the ways that I think it could have most impact. But beyond that, yeah, just plant native stuff. Francis, I can't hear you.
I know I was mute to hide my cough. Yeah, I mean that's great, and we're going to talk about urban wilding in a minute. But let me open it up and see if anyone on here have any points they'd like to raise or questions they would like to ask. Anyone? You've got your hand up, Cecilia. I think
Good afternoon, and thank you very much for having me as well. I could like if Kaya could develop much more about the concept of climate adaptation, because I consider these two words together can open other view and
Okay.
concepts to understand.
Do you mean climate adaptation among humans or climate adaptation of species?
Well, I don't consider very far humans with other species. I'm an anthropologist, and so I consider if your view is very rich, you can develop both if you want, or the interconnection.
So with briefly on the biodiversity, like species are adapting, yes, just at a slower rate than
Yes.
the climate's changing. So I don't think, yeah, we can't really rely on the process of evolution, I think, to sustain biodiversity in this crisis. When could you actually specify what would you like to like a little bit more about climate adaptation?
We are in a transition, that is clear, but we receive a lot of commands how to survive, but not how to face it. And so what you were saying, to put some thoughts maybe that can go further than we initially think about the activity for a community, for the animals, for this kind of small actions have very long steps and impacts, no?
okay.
I think that is a climate adaptation, but maybe there are professionals that they are going much more inside that. No?
Okay, can we go on, because we've got other people who've got their hands up as well. I think Paul and Brian, you have your hands up, and I think Michael, you put your hand up. You got your digital hand up now. You had your physical hand up. Paul, first, you had your hand up first.
Thank you. Thanks, Francis. I volunteer with Surrey Heathland Partnership around Purbright in Surrey. Surrey is a heavily populated county of the UK, but with about 1.1 million people. It has much wet and dry heathland, which is globally important habitat. And over the last 4 to 5 years, due to careful restoration of the heathland, we've seen numbers of rare species coming back to our heathlands. These are things like nightjars, woodlark, Dartford warblers, sand lizards, things like this. So it's not all, I don't feel it's all bad news. In certain places, I feel that careful management is allowing biodiversity to flourish, perhaps in otherwise, difficult circumstances.
Yeah, I would agree. Like where restoration efforts are being put in place, where careful conservation is actually allowed to go on, yes, we can have, and we do have good successes. It's just that, I guess, on the scale of things, yeah, we have less of those than we have of activities that are quite literally destroying nature. But yes, very much so. Conservation does help, and restoration even more so. And it can, yeah, in the UK there are some spectacular examples because it's actually, there's space to do this because some of the areas have been so depleted. So yes, very much so, and that's really great to hear.
And Brian, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Kaya. Yeah, there's a lot of resistance to any movement in order to improve biodiversity. There are so many vested interests, and they are so powerful that small groups like us have great difficulty in making any sort of an impact. Do you think we should be focused on individual small problems, or should we be trying to change the massive political agendas of certain organizations to keep improving growth, economic growth, rather than well, improving economic growth is surely going to be our downfall in the long run, and will cost us our future. But how can we go about influencing the major political powers that want to keep on growing? That's my question.
That's a big question, isn't it, Kay? Whether we go to the
A big
macro
question.
approach,
It's a goal. Yeah.
yeah,
I
or
mean,
whether we concentrate on them dealing with projects.
I honestly am wrapping my head around the same question a lot. Or yeah, where the levers really are. And personally, I can only just tell you what like my personal approach is. I sort of congregated on where I can get engaged in some. For instance, I currently don't have any access to land, either through communities or my own. So, but I'm planning to because I think where if you are part of a group that has got any of any land within whether it's your garden or balcony or you're taking care of a piece of land with others, that's a real opportunity to save something now in a place, to actually generate just a little bit more possibility for this place to display biodiversity for longer and give it opportunities to survive some like the intensifying crises. At the same time, yeah, long term and on a larger scale, if we do not tackle the large paradigms that are in the end writing the rules that mean we are in the place we are, and we are we in the midst of an accelerating biodiversity and climate crisis, then I don't think there's any hope of coming out of it. So I think we probably need to do both, but it's not, I'm just as much trying to answer this question as you are. Or questioning myself this.
Michael, oh, sorry, Brian, you're coming back.
Yeah. I could just mention one example, and that, for example, is the shooting fraternity, who are importing foreign species. They're preparing the land and survival of these beasts just to be shot. And this is being done for the sake of a small number of very rich people. Somehow we've got to break that connection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wish I had some answers to this one, but yeah.
I think, I mean, we'll come to Michael, but I think your question is a really good one, because some people want to tackle the big picture because they think if they don't do that, we won't get anywhere. Other people want to do something that they think they can do individually themselves to make a difference because it gives them a feeling of power and agency. And both are valid, aren't they? The question is, how do we balance the two up? And I think that's a problem that we're going to face in all our webinars and all our discussions. I mean, how do we best approach this issue, or the issues that we know are going to affect us in the years to come? Michael, you've got your hand up.
Hello, yes, thank you. Thank you, Karen. A question I've never quite got my head around. Locally, I've worked with wildlife trusts and so on, and local groups, and it's quite easy when you get hold of a bit of land, even your own garden, to do local restoration, and you can get things coming back either from the seed bank or from coming in from neighboring areas. But the prerequisite of that is have something there in the first place to come in from somewhere else. So when we're talking about a sixth extinction, as what's her name did her book, and it's going to be a mass extinction, 50% mass plus of macro species, and we don't know how many there are, somewhere between 7 and 11 million. If we're going to lose upwards of half of that, whatever that may be, and I assume the half that are going to survive only need to survive in small numbers, 50, 100, 200 viable individuals within a refuge somewhere or other to get back over the rest. When
Mm.
academia is talking about us being in a sixth extinction, are they talking on those sort of scales where we will lose in the near future, 50, 100, 200 years, 50% of the macro species on the planet, and non sequitur to that is the survivors, the other 3.5, 5 million. Are they possibly going to be only surviving in terms of tens, hundreds, thousands? And then the follow-on, most of the mass extinctions I'm aware of, it's taken millions of years for those to re-establish. Is that the sort of the scale of the problem we're facing?
Okay, that's another big question for you, Kaya.
It is a big one. I can tell you what, it is not what is, it is not the scale that is normally being discussed. I'm not, and I'm, if you're involved with the Wildlife Trust, you're probably aware of it. This is not the scale that conservation is normally thinking about. We're thinking much more short term.
Yeah.
And yeah, saving what's here now. I and then maybe this gets back a little bit to Cecilia's question. I'm not sure if this is exactly in that direction, but like, I think this goes so much more beyond it's not a technical problem, right? It's a massive existential crisis.
Yep.
And I think completely outside of my role as a conservation or sustainability researcher, I think just the capacity to imagine even what we're facing is severely limited all across the board, me included. Like just to really face what's possibly coming, and our emotional capacities to sit with this, I think, are also to actually face the scale of the problem and not run straight for solutions. Sit with it, be able to absorb it, be able to feel the pain, connect to what is that, resources that are out there, and then decide what is actually the wisest course of action for me, for society right now. I think that's not present in the discussion very much. That's very much a fringe activity. I'm sad to say.
Okay. Let's go on to the next section and then we'll open it up to discussion again. So there's still plenty of time for people to make points and ask questions. Summer, are you there? Are you on the line?
Hi, yes, I'm
You-
all ready.
You're
Thank you
all
so
ready,
much
are
for
you?
that.
Okay,
Yeah,
well, Summer Baker is going to actually do the questions for the next part of this forum. And I'm really pleased she got the questions together and she's going to talk to Ross and she'll get Ross to introduce himself and tell us what his work is, because it's very much into what Kaya was referring to in terms of rewilding and particularly in urban areas. So Summer, over to you.
hi everyone. Thank you so much for that previous segment. So Ross, if you're here, I'd love if you could just introduce yourself and tell us a bit more about what you do quickly before I start with my sort of main questions.
Hi Ross, are you there?
Hello, I'm so sorry. I've just had a quiet day of no disturbance, and then someone has just come to my door right as I'm supposed to speak. So I was checking the electricity because something went wrong earlier today. So sorry. Please just repeat the last sentence, and then we'll return to our normal programming.
Sorry about that. I'd love if you could introduce yourself and tell us a bit more about what you do before we kind of go into the first question.
Yes, absolutely. So, hi everyone. It's really wonderful to be here, and I think it's great that there's local forums like this where people can talk about these issues. My name is Ross O'Kelly. I am a urban designer, an urban planner, and more recently have moved into rewilding, urban ecology. And last October, I started a not-for-profit called the Urban Wilding Hub, with a mission to help to mainstream urban rewilding across the UK and across Europe.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So my first question is exactly on that. So can you please explain to the audience what are the main principles of urban wilding / rewilding? Thank you, if they're not familiar.
Yes, absolutely. And I'll just say on the top about terminology, we tend to say wilding Other people say rewilding. They basically mean the same thing. It's more of a kind of a branding thing, because sometimes when people hear the word rewilding, they picture a return to some sort of primeval wilderness. And when we're talking about urban areas, we really mean bringing back wildness in small and large ways. So what do we mean by rewilding? And I think, Kaya gave a great kind of introduction to this, so I won't go on too long. But I think in contrast to the traditional conservation approach, which is about protecting the biodiversity that we have, rewilding is really about taking areas that are degraded or have lost their biodiversity, their ecology, and restoring that as best we can. And it's really a way of humans stepping in to maybe fix some of the problems that we've caused in the past, bringing back species that have gone locally extinct, reducing harmful management, reducing the amount of chemicals that we're using to let natural processes start to flow. And then eventually, when we can, kind of stepping back from getting involved and just allowing nature to take its course. There's millions of square kilometers across the world that are currently being rewilded. It's really gone mainstream in the last decade or so, which is really fantastic. But more recently in urban areas, this idea of rewilding or wilding has started to become more popular. And for us, what that means is it comes down to this question of restoring natural processes and reducing the harmful management that we may have been doing. So that can play out in your local garden, also in local parks, large and small, on urban rivers, watercourses, greenbelt land. There's really lots and lots of opportunities for bringing in a wilder approach and welcoming in wilder nature into cities like this.
Amazing. Thank you. So I think you kind of started to go into this, but sort of how can urban wilding help us preserve and protect our biodiversity?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, when we're talking about the big problems of like global biodiversity loss or even national, biodiversity decline in the UK, I think really what's going to turn the tide on that is the large scale rewilding and nature restoration work, changes to our farming practices, these really big scale things. So we could kind of reasonably ask the question, well, why even bother looking at cities or urban nature when that's such a small kind of land area? But really, I think there's three kind of important reasons why we should be serious about restoring urban nature. One is that cities and urban areas are often located in what's called biodiversity hotspots. So these are places that would naturally have high levels of biodiversity and unique sort of habitats. So think of things like along the courses of rivers, in river valleys, along coastlines. These are areas where you would naturally have high biodiversity. They also tend to be good strategic locations for human settlements, which is why we have, our cities located there. So these are places where we can play a really important local role in restoring that local biodiversity that kind of should, in the past would have been much higher. The other thing is this question around actually urban areas and human infrastructure often creating barriers for the movement of animals and for even the spread of all sorts of species. So can we provide kind of habitat corridors through our urban areas so that we can start to break down some of those barriers? That's another, I suppose, important reason to look at rewilding in cities. And the third one, which I think is possibly the most important, is that, particularly in Britain, the vast majority of the population lives in urban areas. So that is the nature that we're all interacting with on a daily basis. And what we know from lots of research is that people who interact meaningfully with nature, with wildlife, on a daily, weekly basis, very often have more pro-environmental and pro-nature behaviors and attitudes and voting patterns and consumption patterns. And so the more we can bring nature into people's life and make it important for them personally, the more chance we have of actually having the sort of greater growth in consciousness about protecting biodiversity, taking action on climate change, etc.
Amazing. So this kind of feeds perfectly into the next question, which I wanted to ask was what kind of urban wilding would best be suited for suburban landscapes, like sort of here in Enfield, to help us expand our biodiversity? Like you kind of talked about sort of urban corridors and into nature, things like that. So if you can kind of talk more on that, that would be perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think sort of general advice for typical, typical local authorities, typical neighborhoods in London or across England would be, first of all, and people have sort of said this already in the comments, stop using pesticides, stop spreading, poison in the landscape. Um, we really just need to shift our mindset to not needing to sort of dominate our green spaces so much, and to actually, as a first step, which a lot of people do as their first step, which is just to step back, stop mowing the lawn so much, allow the grass to grow, and just monitor it and see what happens. You could take a section of a park or a section of your local neighborhood green spaces, put up a sign and say, this is our rewilding area. We're going to let this grow. We're going to cut it once a year in the autumn, and that's it. And we're going to monitor it and we're going to do a biodiversity survey. And bringing people along on that journey can be challenging because many people aren't used to seeing this. But with the right sort of communication, I think with the right sort of organizing, we can get people around to the benefits of this. And you can also get that kind of hard scientific data of saying, look how much we increased our pollinators. Look, we had insects here we've never seen before because we have this habitat now that's developing. So that's kind of like stage one, rewilding 101 almost. Um, the other thing then is there are lots of examples in London and Enfield of really pioneering rewilding projects. So the reintroduction of beavers to several sites around London has been, extremely successful, and they're looking at more locations to reintroduce beavers in East London, in Croydon, and that has, huge benefits for biodiversity in terms of creating wetlands, but also the benefits to mitigating flooding in surrounding areas. You probably have seen the Ealing beavers getting lots and lots of press coverage the last week or so around how within 2 years they've reduced the flooding in the local tube station in the local area in really measurable ways. Um, and then, there's lots of examples of actually doing things more in a more ambitious way. There's even places down in Kingston, South London, where they're bringing kind of hardy breeds of cattle onto a large urban park to actually do the grass mowing in the natural way rather than using a lawnmower. And because they, have all these actions where they'll kind of dig up the soil with their hooves, where they're obviously, excreting onto the soil, that's creating opportunities for little microhabitats for more invertebrate activity, for all these other knock-on benefits to wildlife. So there's lots and lots of examples of ways this is being done in cities. We could also look at restoring watercourses as well, really big and small examples of that from across the world. And I'm happy to send you over some case studies afterwards if that's interesting for people. But yeah, I think the opportunities are absolutely huge within towns and cities to do this. We're not lacking in opportunities. It's really just about having a shift in mindset, getting the money in there, and get cracking with it.
Yeah, so I think that sort of having that larger scale ambition is going to be so important to how we kind of tackle the biodiversity crisis that we're witnessing. But obviously that takes a lot of resources, a lot of money, a lot of top down sort of investment. So is there sort of any ways that you think that we could kind of do more community led projects to facilitate a more sort of bottom up approach to sort of how can people wild their homes, gardens, just in local neighborhoods? How can we make it start?
Yeah, it's a great point. And I think some of the really nice projects that I've seen have been community led. And I think, these can be daunting, and they can be difficult to get off the ground because it takes an element of organization. It takes people often working for free in their spare time to make these things happen. But I do think they play a really important role for motivated people like yourselves who want to see change, happening locally. Um, so I think you can obviously start in your own gardens or any land that you own, and that's an obvious, first step. Many of us don't obviously have that opportunity, so you might be looking at publicly owned spaces or places on a housing estate or in a residential area or owned by a council. So I think what you could do is in your local area identify a location where you think there could be a lot more opportunity for biodiversity, where you want to put in try some of these rewilding principles, come up with some sort of a plan, And then go and speak to your local authority, speak to the landowner, whoever that might be, and try and work out an agreement where you can do that in a way that everyone's sort of in agreement, and that it's not going to get kind of bulldozed at some point because you didn't have permission or that kind of thing. So these things can happen, and I think an example that I think of, again going back to West London, Ealing. It was the Ealing Wildlife Group. It's just a group of local residents who were looking at one of their large parks, which was already a pretty good meadow habitat. And they come up with this idea of actually reintroducing harvest mice, which are native small rodents, absolutely adorable, really important part of the ecosystem. And they're, a food source for birds of prey like owls. And they kind of came up with this plan. They had some nature conservation expertise within the group, and they decided they want to do it, and they got permission from the local authority, and they've been releasing, hundreds of these mice to actually have a breeding center nearby. They've organized, and they're doing everything, in the appropriate, safe way. So these things can happen, and I would encourage anyone to not feel powerless, but to actually have a spirit of let's get together and come up with a plan and try and make this happen. And we might have to ask a few times for it to happen, but these things can definitely happen.
Sorry about that. My Wi-Fi just decided to cut out. But we're doing a lot of work here at NCAF, especially in terms of focusing on community climate resilience. And I was just kind of wondering, from your perspective, in what ways can, urban wilding help us deal with the local aspects of climate change that we're witnessing? As today's a perfect example, like the heat and all that. How can kind of that help us manage these local effects of climate change?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. It's a really key point for me in how I communicate about urban wilding. If you imagine, so we've all had that, and you've probably done this week in the extreme heat of needing to get some relief and maybe going out into a local green space or into your garden and feeling that it is, you get some cooling benefit from being there, allows you to cool down. You can sit in the shade of a tree or something like that. So green spaces, even the sort of traditional parks that we have, they do give us that benefit of kind of cooling the air on hot days. And this can be really, really important for many, many people. But there is a fragility and a vulnerability to those very, very manicured, formal landscapes that we often have in cities. So if you've got your space and it's a mown lawn and it's a couple of feature trees, some ornamental flowers, that kind of thing, you'll get to a certain point where that will just fully basically dry out. The grass will go into dormancy. The soil will kind of become a hard pan. And at that point, it loses its ability to cool the air. And parks, I experienced this certainly when it reached 40 degrees in 2022, going into Victoria Park near where I lived at the time, and just being like, this is the same temperature as it is out on the road. There was no difference. So so if you contrast that with going into an actual natural habitat, so a woodland or somewhere with much more dense vegetation, what you have there is dozens and dozens of species of vegetation, ones that have more heat tolerance, more drought tolerance than others, which will keep being alive and keep releasing the water into the air, which actually creates that cooling effect. You're probably getting more shade if have that more dense vegetation around, but also the fact that in a sort of woodland or a dense, mature grassland or something, that will help to contain its moisture much better. So it will actually, the whole ecosystem will stay alive for longer and will be more resilient to those kind of heat waves. So that's, for me, is a key point of why we need wilder spaces, why we need real habitats in cities, is they will just be more resilient to the effects of climate change, and therefore will give us, the more benefits as we face more of these like hotter summers. And I've already mentioned a little bit about flood resilience. Beavers work an amazing magic, but it doesn't have to be only beavers. Getting in depaving spaces that have unnecessary amounts of concrete or asphalt, replacing that with soil, with vegetation, bringing in, creating more ponds, which are fantastic for biodiversity, but can also help to store some of that rainwater. Lots of really proven techniques that we can employ on a local level to make us more resilient to climate change.
Okay, Summer, I think that's the end of your questions, isn't it?
Sorry, yes, thank
Yeah,
you.
it is. Yeah. Well, thank you, Summer, for doing that. And thank you, Ross. I mean, that was great. And they were great questions you got together there, Summer, and that helped. Let's bring the attendees in again. I think, Vicky, you had your hand up. I think you had your hand up earlier and then you disappeared. But do you want to come on?
Thank
Vicky?
you. Yes, I did, and then disappeared and thought maybe that it will be answered. It's just the question is about advice to people around here where I live quite rurally, and there's a tendency to think, oh, we just plant trees. And, an understanding I think I have that, when you plant a tree, you are disturbing a habitat that was already there. So I just wondered what the advice is. We've got an organization very nearby here, a huge organization that's planting, I think it's 1 million trees. And I'm sure they're being very careful about not disturbing where they can anyway. But I just wondered about the general advice because it's what people seem to go to as an easy way to feel they're doing something. They've got a field, they've got a garden, plant a tree.
Ross,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's this quite, yeah, and I think there's been a growing awareness more recently that, just planting trees is not the solution to the climate and biodiversity crisis. And of course, trees are not the only thing that capture carbon, but actually there's much more carbon stored in soil than there is in all the trees in the world. So I think there's nothing wrong in principle with planting trees where it's done like appropriately, where thought has gone into the tree selection for the right site, where there's an understanding that they'll need to be maintained for the first couple of years because there's particularly in cities because the microclimate can be more aggressive. Tree mortality within the first 3 years is quite high. So they need to be watered, they need to be, monitored. So I think, there can be opportunities of going in and actually planting lots of trees can be a really good thing, but it's not the only thing we can do. And many times, actually, it will be cheaper and much easier to simply step back from the management, as I've said, and then kind of watch what happens. And what you'll find is you'll get trees seeding naturally as they do. Trees didn't evolve for us to plant them. Basically, trees have evolved to spread themselves naturally. And when we allow the space to do that, we get reforestation happening over longer timescales, of course. And maybe it's the issue is that people don't have the patience to wait for a forest to form naturally. But yeah, I think it's very context specific. But you raise a really good point.
Michael, you've got your hand up again.
Following on from that, locally we've gone through over the last decade, I guess, the hedge planting, wildflower areas, seed, etc. Came across a thing last autumn, the Miyawaki Japanese foresters idea, the micro-urban forest. And we put in a couple of those in the spring, one with council funds and the other with Woodland Trust batch. They've only been in 3 months. They're still alive, as far as I can make out to all of them. Is that as good as, I know, your experience, a good method, or are there better alternatives for getting relatively quick and using the correct mix, as you say, adding in the herbal air, etc., to get a small, quick growing, noticeable forest that's less likely to be mown by the next aggressive council worker on a gang mower?
Yeah, great question. For people who aren't familiar, the Miyawaki method is a method of basically kickstarting a kind of forest ecosystem by, I suppose, if you think about a typical park, all the trees are planted like 3-4 meters away from each other in like neat rows. And if you go to a plantation forestry, it's all like that. Of course, that's not how things happen in nature. So the Miyawaki method says, well, let's source some local native tree species that occur in the area, and let's just plant them really densely together, usually 3 per square meter, and as random as you can, basically. So, I was part of a Miyawaki planting in North London, and they were like, they were like, kids are the best at this because they don't like question what they're doing. They just stick them in the ground, which is what you need to do. And the results from the ones that have been around, there's ones in Asia that have been around for decades, and there's ones in Europe and the UK that are kind of coming close to about 10 years, look really, really promising because you get a really, really dense, concentrated amount of vegetation in one place, which is exactly what lots of birds and invertebrates and small mammals want and need out of their habitats, and lots of diversity. So yeah, I think they can be brilliant. They look pretty unimpressive for the first like year or two, but if you hold on, they get pretty spectacular.
I gather they can be the size of a football pitch. I mean, they're not very, very large. We might come to you, Michael and Ross, for advice because we've got one of our members has got 10 businessmen in our area willing to sponsor the planting of trees, and the local authority has said they'll work with us. But we want to make sure they're the right trees, they're in the right place, they're cared for. So having your advice on that, I think would be great. So we may come back to you on that if that's okay, and
Absolutely.
take your advice on that. Mary, you had your hand up while you was cooking. You were doing two things. I was quite impressed. But you've got your hand up.
Yes, I'm always having to multitask. We're in a little group. I think they're funded by Camden Council, but they get this take us for walks on Hampstead Heath, and the person who leads it is called Jeff Wagg, and he's a proper ecologist, and he looks at all the I think Hampstead Heath is managed by the City of London. That's why I'm a little bit confused as to who's in charge, but I think he advises them on the biodiversity. They've done a lot of work on the ponds, and it used to be just the grass was mown, but there are certain areas where they allow the ordinary plants to grow. So if you don't know him, it might be worth talking to him. He might be able to explain what he does. But we go for these every few months. We go for these walks along the heath. A gang of about 20 people sort of follow along, and he talks about it, and also the insects. He's got this he's got this instrument where he can gather up the insects and have a look and see what's there. So, but I'll send you the details if you don't know him already.
Okay, thanks, Mary. And Asani has his hand up. Asani, by the way, joins us regularly, and he's from Nigeria, so that will be interesting. So do you want to make your point, Asani?
Good evening. Hello. Hello.
Yeah, we can hear you.
My name is Asani Olumide. I'm, speaking from Nigeria. My question to Rose is the fact that,
You've disappeared, Asani.
Yeah, he's frozen on my end as well.
Yeah. Sometimes he has trouble with his connection. Let's see if he can come back on. Is there anyone else who would like to make a point or ask a question? Do you want to respond to anything that's been said, Kaya, at all that you've heard?
I can just see Cara waving. So it sounds like maybe she had a question.
Yeah, you say you don't want to say anything else. Okay.
I do see a question from Asani in the chat about biodiversity net gain. So maybe I can just
he's put it in the chat. Yeah, go ahead.
Give a little comment on that. How about the English biodiversity? Yeah, so biodiversity net gain is this legislation that came in 3 years ago, which is that new developments, so housing or offices or anything, should deliver 10% more biodiversity than was on the site previous to development. So it sounds great in principle, and I think the principle behind it is really good. I think the challenge with it, and I've spoken to landscape architects and ecologists who work like on this detailed level, and what they're finding challenging about it is that it's in order to do this 10% thing, like how do you judge what 10% is? So the way they quantify it is they kind of boil biodiversity and the habitats down into like a scoreable matrix that goes into a spreadsheet. And they say, well, this type of habitat has this score. And if you replace it with this habitat, that's a bigger score. So that's better. And it's, you know, I understand why they've done that because they have to make it quantifiable. They have to make it, you know, you can apply it anywhere across the country. But it kind of divorces you from the reality of the site and the reality of the nature that is there. So my understanding from people who are sort of in the trenches and working with this is that they're happy that there's something that is pushing developers to do better with nature, but I think it could do with a lot of improvement, and to be more kind of responsive to local context, responsive to how kind of nature actually works in the real world.
Okay, Helen, you've got your hand up. You need to unmute.
Sorry. Hi there. Hi, thank you. I've got a question really about pesticides and about pesticide use in animals, especially our pet animals. I'm a veterinary surgeon and involved in a sustainability group of vets, and some of the members have done some quite interesting research where we've discovered quite a lot of these nasty pesticides. Pesticides are banned in agriculture that we are putting on our pets as flea treatments, and these are appearing in our rivers and environments, in songbird nests and things in at alarming levels. And I wondered if Ross had anything to say about that. Ross or Kaya?
I mean, you both want to respond to that. Do you want to first of all, Kaya, and then come to Ross?
I've also just got anecdotal evidence about this, but yeah, to the point that when I was living in Scotland, there were signs to not bring in dogs into pasture areas because they were afraid of the excrements and the effect that can have on the farmed animals. Like sometimes,
but that excrement, it's parasites that the dog can.
Oh, maybe there was parasites. Okay, right. Yeah. So that wasn't the best.
So I think there's very little knowledge at the moment or awareness around the pesticides that we put on animals to prevent fleas that are then shed through their coats all the time. So if they go swimming, if you stroke your animal and they wash your hands, then it's down into the rivers. You know, it's quite a serious problem. But
I think, Ross, maybe you've got a bit more information.
Ross, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I haven't looked into this deeply, but I am aware of some studies of the effects of the flea treatments when dogs go and swim in ponds or lakes, that those can be really, really detrimental to the other, you know, species that are living in aquatic environments. The other thing that I suppose people don't maybe think about is the fact that if you have your, you know, a dog and you're bringing them out for a walk into a nature reserve or a large park or a place there might be some biodiversity, you know, to all the other animals that are there, that's essentially a wolf, and it's something to be feared. And particularly if they're, you know, running around gleefully through the shrubs and all that kind of thing, which we love to see. You know, what we don't see often is that is scaring away small mammals, scaring away birds, and if they get enough of that kind of disruption, they may just leave the site. So, you know, we're not really taught these things. We never told these things, like when we get dogs, or, you know, how we should manage them. And of course, I think, you know, local authorities and places could be better at signposting these things and trying to encourage maybe keeping dogs on leashes or all that kind of thing, or having areas where dogs aren't allowed to go. So yeah, those are just some thoughts.
Yeah, thank you.
Anyone else who wants to say anything?
I still see Cara just
trying to
her hand like that.
Thank you.
So who was that?
Cara?
Cara?
Hi. I thought I'd better say something because I'm probably one of the few farmers in this meeting. So I thought I'd better sort of wade in and I've got 2 or 3 points I'd quite like to make. First of all, what Kaya said at the very beginning was that perhaps these big farming organizations seem to have so much power. In actual fact, these big farming organizations do not represent all farmers, especially they don't represent small farmers like myself, comparatively small farmers. And there's a big difference, I think, between intensive farmers and, those are intensive conventional farmers, and those who are farming in a much smaller, more nature-friendly way. But I think my first point is to everybody here that as a farmer, I'd like to say that there is hope. And I've been involved in some of the development of something called the Landscape Recovery Scheme. And farmers, lots of small farmers together are quite a powerful group. And what we're doing here in Derbyshire is making clusters of farmers, and then we're applying to DEFRA for this landscape recovery scheme. And we're doing that in conjunction usually with the wildlife trusts and have professional advice. So about 2 weeks ago, I went down to Suffolk and had a look at their landscape recovery scheme that they've been doing there. And the results are absolutely fantastic, even after a couple of years. They're providing food and nature, and the woodland and the arable fields are absolutely full of wildlife. So it is possible to do this. It seems difficult if you're just a small farmer, but the power is in clusters. My next point really is we all wonder what we can do, and I absolutely applaud all the methods that I've been listening to from the two speakers and from the rest of the audience. But I think it's interesting really that you have to stop doing harm. You have to stop being destructive. And the biggest way we can do that is to reduce our meat consumption and our dairy consumption, because those are the main drivers of a lot of the destruction on farmland and the intensive farming methods which are required to keep cattle indoors just to produce milk. Dietary change has to be up there as one of the biggest things that we can do. And if we can spread that word, I know it's unpopular, but I'll stick my head on the block and suggest it anyway. So I think the final thing I want to say is that I realise as a farmer how important it is for people to have a connection with nature, and how what we see and what we feel when we're in that environment is important to all of us. And so, I accept a responsibility as a farmer for providing that too. So that's me done as a farmer anyway. Thank you very much for listening.
Okay, no, it's great to have you on here. So thank you for saying that. And Jill, you have your hand up too. Jill?
I can't really follow that. That was so magnificent. But I have a small question. I was at the Severn Estuary and I was talking to somebody who was one of the last salmon fishermen in the Severn Estuary. And I asked him why the salmon were depleted, and he said a lot was down to, he thought a lot was down to runoff from roads. So I guess it goes down the drains and into the rivers. So all our car tires and our bits of oil. I just wondered if either of the speakers had anything to comment about that, how we can sort of work with, is there any way that we can stop this?
Ross, Kaya, do you want to respond to that?
I can give a couple of thoughts. I think our watercourses have gotten hit in all sorts of directions, from historically being straightened into channels, where they would have otherwise kind of wiggled and meandered across the landscape. That has a big impact on biodiversity. I think the kind of mismanagement of water by water companies, which are private companies in England, has been, has locally had really big impacts with, huge amounts of runoff from farms, as well as, chemicals, industry that, really should be mitigated in some way. So yeah, I think watercourses have been hit from all sides, and I think the runoff of pollution from roads is probably just one of those. part of the mix, I imagine.
Hey, Fiona, Fiona, if we take Fiona and Paul, and then let's wrap up, because I think we're getting close to time. With the third speaker, as I said, couldn't be here tonight because he's ill, so we may finish a bit early, which, given the heat, I think people might not be objecting to too much. But Fiona, first you, and then Paul.
I've just opened the window. It's starting to cool down, but Durham hasn't been too bad. I'm a member of Climate Action Durham, and we've been having a bit of a review of the areas that we should be, developing more perhaps. And I think listening especially to Ross's talk of working with councils and identifying areas that, we might be able to do more wilding in sounds a really good thing to be doing. We do have a reform council in Durham, and they've rescinded the climate declaration, but they are nonetheless bringing out a new environment strategy, which I'll have a look at. But does anybody here have any experience of working with their council, not necessarily reform council, but Paul's put his hand up, so I'll let him speak. And how did you go about it, and what did you do? Thank you.
Paul.
Hi, Fiona. I'm just writing something on the chat for you because I'm part of Zero Carbon Guildford, which many of you have probably heard of.
Oh, he's gone.
You're frozen.
I'll look at the chat then if you want.
Look at the chat.
Yeah.
We're going to
Carbon
finish
Guildford. Just look us up.
Oh, he's come
Yeah,
back
I
again.
will. Thank you, Paul. I'll have a good look on your website.
Okay. Did you want to say
Okay,
anything
fine.
else, Paul?
Yes. Just on the rivers. There's, as you will all know, we've all got rivers running through our authorities, and river testing, water testing is becoming a big issue now. Well, a big project for lots of charities and organisations. And Zero Carbon Guildford had got one in liaison with the River Wey Trust. The River Wey runs through Surrey, basically 160 kilometres of it and its tributaries. And I'm a water ranger on that, so I test for E. coli, nitrates, phosphates, and the general state of the river. It's the problem we've got is we've got 10 or 12 stations, water testing stations, where we test E. coli every week and phosphates and nitrates every month. But this all costs money to get the E. coli back to the lab, and the equipment and the methodology. It costs money, and it's funding that, and it's finding sources of funding. So I'm just trying to get some funding now for a site where I am, and I've gone to my local council.
We lost him again. Just give him a few seconds.
A reasoned a judgment, a request, an application with reasons, good reasons for it, and also parish councils, Surrey County Council's very much into all that as well. So it's a matter of looking around and finding these, but use your local councillors, definitely.
Okay, that's great. Vicky, can you make the last point? If you can make it very brief, and then we'll sum up.
Yes, okay. It was only in response to about working with councils. I am a parish councillor, slightly reluctant one, but we've managed to work with the verges. We've got really successful keeping the verges uncut until September, one cut only. And we're in the middle of writing a biodiversity plan. But it isn't you've only got one or two people on the council that are really interested. It's me going on and on and on and feeling they'd rather I wasn't there, really. So that was a response to working with the council.
Okay. Thanks. I mean, David Marsh put something up in the chat, which is quite interesting. He said, when you're working with the council, send them emails about the things that they're doing well, not just about the things they're doing badly, because that encourages them to do things even more that you want them to do. And I thought that was a really good point, and I think it's probably worth ending with. So yeah, I mean, I think it's been a good forum tonight, and everyone, and lots of people have participated. So, you know, thank you everyone for attending. Thank you, Ross, for attending, and for Kaya, and for doing your presentations. And I'm sure we'll be in touch with you again, and any advice and help that you can give. So that's great. And thank you, Summer, for doing your questions as well. So our next forum, which is in the end of July, as I said, will be on heat excess itself, you know, what the crisis is, also which people will be most affected, which areas will be most affected, and what we can do about it. So we'll be putting publicity out on that again fairly soon. And I will hopefully tomorrow, if the heat doesn't overcome me, edit this video so we can put it back on YouTube and you can see it again, and those people who registered and couldn't come tonight will be able to see it, and we'll send it around in the newsletter as well. So thank you everyone for attending. It's been really good, and I hope you can all go now and find some way of relieving yourself from the hot weather we have at the moment, which I know is affecting a lot of people. So thank you everyone for joining. And we'll end this webinar now.